Good evening. Are you thinking of selling your house, but you're trying to avoid litigation at all costs? Or maybe you just sold your house and you're not really sure if you're going to be in litigation with the buyer potentially in the future? Well, today I have a special guest. She is a real estate lawyer, and she will be going over special, not special things, keep saying special. She will be talking to us about the real estate world in regards to legalities. And if you want to avoid getting sued, this is definitely something that you want to pay attention to, whether you're on the buy side or the sell side. This is going to be a very important live stream to watch. So without further ado, go ahead. She's going to.
Hi, Rebecca.
Hi.
Thanks for having me.
Yes.
I'm Paula Hester. I'm with Fidelity National Title. I've been a title attorney and real estate attorney for more years than I care to remember, but about 23. And I'm board certified in residential real estate. That is 99% of what I do is talk to people about buying and selling their primary residence or their investment properties.
Correct. So I'm really excited that you're here today to share some of the legal aspects. And Paula has some amazing stories we were talking earlier. I don't know if amazing is the right word, but they're very interesting. We'll just put it that way. But we'll go ahead, and I do want to remind you that if you are watching this live, that we will have questions at the very end. So if you do happen to have a question for myself or Paula about the real estate market or just real estate, legal real estate matters, there we go, that's the right way to say it, then for sure, be sure to type your questions in the comments. I will be, going over those for sure at the very end. So make sure you have some good questions for us. So let's go ahead and talk quickly. I guess today's focus is really going to be on the seller's disclosure. The buyer gets a copy of it. The seller has to fill it out. So it is important to know how that kind of comes into play. And I want to say I remember reading an article that is the one document that has the highest amount of legal cases.
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
Is that correct? Okay.
That's correct, because once you close, most of the guarantees or the warranties that are in the contract do what we call merge into the deed. But one document that survives closing is the seller's disclosure. So it's a document that after closing, someone can sue on. And it's something a judge will give a ton of weight to, take a look at, and it's going to be the document you live and die by. And so I would say that not just with the seller's disclosure, but a number one issue for sellers and buyers, both alike, is to read and to understand that this is a business transaction. And we sometimes kind of forget that, and we sometimes rely on other people instead of taking it super seriously. For most, it's going to be the largest purchase that we make in our lifetime. It's a lot of money, and we need to take it super seriously, and we need to take the time to read all of the documents. And there are a lot. Like, I understand. I've closed many people. After we talked, I started trying to figure out how many closings I have been responsible for managing over my 23 years in the business, and it's hundreds of thousands of closings. And so just the closing documents alone are usually around 135 pages. So it's a lot to read, but I would say without a doubt, number one piece of advice that I have for any seller getting ready to sell is to kind of get your ducks in a row, read your documents, make sure you understand the listing agreement, make sure you understand the seller's disclosure document, look at your past documents. So the law considers that you know what you learned in your past closing. But sitting here today, I closed on my land that I built my home 15 years ago. Do I remember what was in my closing documents 15 years ago? For sure not, for sure. But the law assumes that I do know. I have that responsibility to go back and review those documents, and anything that I learned in my first closing about the property that could affect my new buyer, I need to disclose that. So number one, you want to start with those old closing documents. You want to take a look at, refresh your memory about what was not working in the home, or what issues did we have with the property when we bought it, or anything that we need to disclose to the potential new buyer. So great place to start, number one, is with your old closing documents.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that the inspection report too, that maybe you had an inspection done 5 or 6 years ago and you still have a copy of that, would that be a good reference point whenever you are filling out the seller's disclosure to kind of refresh your brain on, oh yeah, I forgot about this. We didn't do anything about it, but
right.
I.
Yeah. So you have to disclose anything that's not working in the property. And an old inspection report is a good place to start, to refresh your memory, to remind yourself, oh, I forgot that wasn't working, and we don't ever use that particular room, so we didn't fix that. And so that's something we would want to disclose. Even better, it's something that we would want to correct. So, obviously we want to step off with our best foot forward. So the best way to do that is to just make sure all those things are fixed and corrected, and we've hired somebody to do those. Always a risk if we're going to do it ourselves. Now, I mean, do we need to hire somebody to screw in a screw? No, but for bigger repairs, it's always better for us to rely on the expertise of a professional that gives us an extra defense if we get down to the courthouse for any reason. So that starting with that old inspection report and refreshing our memory about what needs to be corrected is a great place to start. And if we're just not going to correct it for whatever reason, then we absolutely have to put it on that seller's disclosure form.
Yeah. And what I've really been seeing, which is unfortunate, I think, because the market is moving so quickly that, I let my buyers, if the seller's disclosure is filled out ahead of time, I let them know about it. I say, read over it. But most of the time, this is what I'm coming across. I'm coming across a seller's disclosure that is either incomplete, it's not filled out correctly, it's missing all types of information, especially with the new part of the seller's disclosure that refers to floodplains. Is it in a partial flood zone? Is it in,
Sure.
Which zone is it in? If it's got a creek behind it, and there are special addenda, it says, if you check yes, explain why. Or if you check yes, you need to also fill out this form too.
That's right.
So I am seeing quite a few incomplete ones for that piece of it, and not everything is kind of shown and put forth on the table. So if I represent quite a few buyers, and the market here is pretty buyer heavy right now. I think everywhere it's pretty buyer heavy. What advice would you give? And I've been trying to get the listing agent to say, look, the seller's disclosure looks incomplete. Can you give us more information about X? But it's like pulling teeth to try to get.
Absolutely. It is. And I would say a couple of things about that. There are quite a few people that believe that certain sellers are exempt from providing the seller's disclosure notice. And there's a very, very set of narrow exceptions to the seller's disclosure law. Most have to provide it. The exceptions are very few. Certainly that does not apply to investors. They're still required to give a seller's disclosure. So that's number one. I find, quite a few people don't understand that it is required in almost all cases. Secondly, your recourse as a buyer is to not close. That's really your only recourse. There's not much else that you can do. So once you've closed, you've sort of kind of accepted it. So let's say someone didn't give a seller's disclosure, they refuse to do so, and you go ahead and close, you probably don't have any claims at that point. I mean, you've closed, you knew it going in, and you closed anyway. So just keeping in mind that closing is your only weapon, if you will, against a bad seller's disclosure, an incomplete seller's disclosure, or a non-existent seller's disclosure. I would say, I remember as a young lawyer, someone handing me a contract to review that was very long, and it had, 10, 12 as-is clauses. and I handed the contract back to the buyer and I said, I don't know what they're hiding, but they're hiding something and you need to find it, because no one puts that many as is clauses in a document if they're not trying to warn you that there's something wrong with the property that they're not going to be liable for after closing. Sure enough, he didn't check, and then he ends up buying a piece of land that couldn't be built on because it was in a flood zone. There was something that they were hiding. So anytime there is a missing element to the seller's disclosure, you've got to ask yourself why. It's one of two reasons. Either the seller just doesn't know the information and they aren't going to go look it up, or they don't know how to look it up, or there's some reason they're not giving you the answer that you need. And I think you just have to assume it's the latter, and exercise a little bit more due diligence than you normally would. Or at that point, maybe make an addendum to our amendment to the contract, giving you more review time. For example, if we're talking about flood zone, and maybe then you buy a flood cert from the surveyor to make sure that you have satisfied yourself that it's not in a flood zone. Whatever's missing, you just want to pay special attention to, because once you close, you've kind of closed. You're kind of out. It's not there's some potential causes of action that you could have, but it's very diminished.
Okay. So let's say that I have a seller in this situation, and they always advise me, they're like, you can't explain anything on the seller's disclosure because that would be giving legal advice.
Sure.
So what are if someone says, well, I don't know what type of roof I have, they just don't know, or they don't know if they have X, Y, or Z, what is the best remedy for that solution? And I have one solution in mind that I've been using, but I just want to see what you have to say.
Yeah, I always go to the source, because there's a potential cause of action called the Deceptive Trade Practices Act, which is, to oversimplify it, it's you can't advertise something to have qualities that it doesn't have. And my very, very simplistic example is, if you go to a big box store to buy a television and you bring it home and it just simply doesn't work, then it doesn't matter that the big box store didn't know it didn't work. They sold you something that doesn't work, and they've got to make that right. So the same thing sort of applies to selling homes. You got to describe and advertise your property as it is. And if you don't know, then you need to go find out. This is a business transaction. You don't really get to say, I don't know, so therefore I'm going to leave it blank, or I'm just going to guess. And you certainly don't want to guess, because you don't want to guess wrong. But you'll have to go find that. You'll have to go find the information to whatever it is you don't know. A lot of it we get is homeowners association on the title side. We hear that a lot. I don't know who my homeowners association is, which I always think is kind of strange. Like, have you not been paying your dues? I mean, who have you been paying your dues to? But a lot of times people have no idea, or I think it was my neighbor 3 doors down, but now I don't know. Well, we got to know that. Like, you got to go look. You got to go find out and get that information and get that to the title company or to the other side. There is a responsibility as a seller to go find that information out. But we're in an age of fast food and quick answers, and people don't want to read and take the time. But number one, no question, do your homework and do your work early, and you're going to avoid a lot of different causes of action that could land you in the courthouse.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people don't make that realization when they're filling out the seller's disclosure. They don't realize the longevity of the document, and they don't understand just how important it is to fill it out correctly. But there is a computer software program called Seller Shield.
Okay.
And in that program, if you don't know what a shingle, or a composite
roof is,
versus another type of roof, it has a little question box, and it'll explain each part of it. Nice. And so that way I'm not on the hook. I didn't explain this to you, but I think it's a group of real estate lawyers that put this together, because you can purchase coverage for so many days after the property's closed. You have legal coverage for that particular document. Some decide that they want that protection, and then others decide that they don't, or they feel like they've filled it out enough to where, and usually when I do have a seller, you need to fill it out as much as possible. The more you can disclose, the better.
Almost always that's the case, for sure. The only thing I would say, and that sounds like a great program, I'm not familiar with it, but that's what a great tool. The only thing that I would add to that is we want to make sure we don't have another document in our possession that has a different answer. And that becomes difficult, because if we are in possession of an inspection report or an insurance policy or an appraisal from when we bought it or when we refinanced, and that has a different answer than the one that program gave us, that's going to be tough for us to overcome at the courthouse. And that's going to be a tough one to explain, because we should have known we had that document in our possession. It's probably not going to help us that program gave us a different answer if we were in possession of the answer all along. And I see that a lot with square footage. What's the actual square footage of the property, and what should we rely on? I've got all these different answers, and what should we rely on? Well, that's the answer. You give all answers. This is what the appraisal district shows. This is what the appraiser shows. This is what my building documents show. And you write a statement. The other thing I would say is that which is really tough when you're at the courthouse in litigation and you're rereading some of the things that people have written, and they're not in complete sentences, or they just simply don't make sense at all. Like, there's no way to understand that. And so I think one of the things that I say to realtors all the time is read out loud what you're writing. Read it back and make sure that it makes sense and it's conveying the message you intended for it to convey. And keep in mind, when you're talking about that seller's disclosure, or you're talking about a breach of contract action, the judge is going to look at what's contained in what we call the four corners of the document, or the four corners rule. So what you've got on that document is going to be what your evidence is. And there's not going to be a lot of opportunity, or if any, to explain, well, this is what I really meant. The judge is going to look at those words and draw a conclusion of the jury. And so we want to make sure that when we're filling out a seller's disclosure or anything else, any other communication, that it's in complete sentences. I mean, it's kind of easy stuff, but it happens a lot where I will read something that someone wrote and get a totally different meaning than what was intended to be conveyed. And so sometimes reading it out loud, making sure it's complete sentences and that really conveys the right message, can help us too.
Yeah, I didn't think about reading it out loud. That makes a lot of sense, because you can put emphasis on the wrong word and it may have a completely different meaning.
Absolutely. I just took a contracts class a couple of months ago that was all about, it was taught by a lawyer, but he's also a high school principal, one of the best classes I've ever taken. And he showed lots of examples where punctuation and commas and emphasis on different words can give an entirely different meaning than what was intended to convey. So it's always helpful to use the plainest language. Don't try to sound like a lawyer. Use everyday words and try to make sure you're writing in complete sentences. And if you need a couple of more sentences to explain, then that's fine. Just make sure we're giving all the information and that we've double checked. We want to know what's in our possession that will have that answer for us. And we want to make sure that we convey all the information from all the documents that are in our possession, or that should be in our possession, or that we had in our possession.
So as a title company, would you say, does the title company review the seller's disclosure at all? Or is that mainly in the, okay, it's just mainly the main one that people get sued over?
It is. It's the main, if you're talking about that type of suit, buyer versus seller, that's probably going to be the main source of heartache, without a doubt. Undisclosed repairs, in my opinion, are probably the number one. If I think back on all the calls that I get every day or every week, that's probably the number one. And it's really not so much the seller's disclosure. It's not really so much of the wording of the seller's disclosure as much as they just simply didn't disclose something. And I think you and I were talking the other day that I was talking with a pest control guy who takes care of roof rats, a very common thing here in Dallas-Fort Worth. I didn't know that, but very common. And he was telling me that every day he meets with a buyer who has roof rats, who has already closed, and he has to tell them there is evidence in your attic that they tried to get rid of the roof rats. They tried to kill them or poison them or whatever they did. And there's plenty of evidence there. So we know the seller knew and just didn't disclose it. And so those types of non-disclosure items are the number one call I get about a buyer wanting to sue the seller. And a contractor having that sort of information does happen. It's really dramatic when it happens because it's not that often that you have the exact same contractor or a contractor that can see evidence that something was covered up. But of course, the number one person to tell a buyer what was wrong with the property is always the neighbor.
Yes.
Always going to be the neighbor. The neighbor is going to tell all your secrets when you move out. So if you have been dealing with a French drain or a flooding problem or a termite problem, and you
or a drain, I had one instance. It was the friend of mine. He found out about the underneath the pipes, not in the fountain. Well, the pipes that led to the sewer pipes. Those were. The neighbor said, "Oh, well, so and so dug this big hole over here so that he could reroute the sewer pipes."
Yeah.
And my person's going, "What?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Every single time a neighbor knows, they're going to tell. So every time, that's how in most of the time, that is how it happens, is a neighbor. And there's a pretty interesting case. I forget which state it was. It was up north. We call it the snake house case, but it was a case where there was a snake infestation in the property. Ooh. And when the buyer moved in, it was wintertime. And so the snakes were dormant. And as spring happened, they started getting snakes in the crib and the walls. I mean, it was truly infested. In fact, they ultimately, I believe, can't remember if it went to trial or it was just in a deposition. They had experts that testified that you would have to burn the house down and wait 10 years for the snakes to go away out of the ground to build a new house, because anything that you just rebuilt, the snakes would just come back because they were in the ground. So the question is, well, did the sellers know? Hard to believe the sellers didn't know, right. Yes. But they found lots of tenants and neighbors and all sorts of folks that were like, oh yeah, they've been dealing with a snake problem for a very, very long time. So, if you've got a big problem like that, someone's going to tell. I mean, it's going to come out. You're better off hitting it straight on and just saying, here's our problem. Yep. And this is our sales price. And that's just, it is what it is. And it's a seller's market. So there's no reason not to be completely forthright, because you're probably still going to get 25 offers, right? Yes. In the first hour, probably still.
In the first hour, right.
In the first hour, right.
Yeah. Randy, he's a regular on the show. He was saying that roof rats are squirrels. Yeah, to a certain degree. Rats are a little bit.
No, they're rats. They're rats with little pointy faces. Yeah, they're black. They're really pointy faces. They're disgusting. I had them. They're gross. Yeah, they're interesting though. They come and go in the exact same little path. And so, they're interesting, but they're really common, especially in San Antonio. We have them a lot in Dallas-Fort Worth. So they're not cute like squirrels. They're rats. No.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. We've had squirrels in our attic too. And
yes, sure.
As well. So.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I was going to ask you, what is the most common part of the seller's disclosure that people will get sued over? Like, what's the one part that the seller either doesn't know and doesn't disclose enough, or, the buyer doesn't ask enough questions about it?
I would say it's probably two things. I don't know which one would take precedence over the other, but it's either water penetration or water drainage, something to do with water, whether a lot of times water standing still somewhere and they are flooding when it rains. Maybe the back porch flood is something to do with water is a lot of the calls that I get. And then the other one that I would say would be some sort of pests, termites, roaches, bugs, rats, whatever. It's because people are so horrified, obviously, by that is probably why that's another one I get a lot of calls about, or some sort of pest. Years ago, I had a buyer who called me and wanted to talk about the property he had bought, and he had termites, and he didn't get an inspection. And he said, when he called me, he said, no lectures that I didn't get an inspection. I already know. I've already heard it. I don't need to hear it again. I'm like, no problem. No lecture here. But he told me his whole story, and he'd had somebody out to take a look, and he was infested with termites and wanted to file suit against the seller. And did I think that he had a case? And I said, well, but I mean, suing is expensive. I mean, the reality is going to the courthouse is not cheap. It's pretty expensive. I mean, you have small claims court you can do, but even that is pretty invasive in your life. It's a big step to sue somebody or to be sued. It really is. But I said, it'd be better if you had some proof that the seller knew and didn't disclose. That would it would be a stronger case. And he said, well, the funny thing is that the guy from the pest control that came out was the guy that had come out on the previous buyer, and that buyer had walked because of a termite infestation, and the termite guy was like, dude, you got to fix this, like you're infested with termites. So that case was super clear. He had a great witness. I mean, all you had to do was subpoena that guy, and he had a great case, and I'm sure they settled. I do get a lot of stories, and I don't always get the ending to the story. So I have all these stories, and I don't ever know the endings because nobody ever calls me back and tells me what happened. But I'm sure in that case, they settled quite a bit because it was such a strong case. But yeah, be careful. I mean, pests are a big one. Termites. I mean, chances are the buyer is going to find the termite company that you used, and they're going to come out, and they're going to be a great witness because they're a neutral third party. They have no reason not to testify truthfully. In my case, there was a sticker on the inside of a cabinet the buyer found, and he called that particular pest company, and that's who had come out.
Yeah. So, I wonder too, do foundation, are there many lawsuits about foundations?
No, I mean, that's not what I hear most often are foundations. Yeah. Obviously those are big. That's a big dollar item that wouldn't be, that would need to be corrected. I've actually had a case that was sort of the opposite of that in that, and it's interesting in that there was no foundation issue, but we had an inspector that came out and said, oh, I think you might have foundation issues. They brought a structural engineer out who said, no, foundation is perfect. There's nothing wrong with it. But they continue to disclose that they had an inspector, that buyer dropped for financing reasons. They had to continue to disclose, or they did continue to disclose. They don't necessarily have to, but they did, that there was an inspection done and a structural engineer's report. And every buyer just ran from the property because, I mean, why would you have a structural engineer if you didn't have a foundation problem? He didn't. He just had a bad inspector that had made a mistake, or a new inspector. I don't remember what the issue was, but that was a little bit of the opposite problem, that he didn't have anything wrong with the property. And then it got to be a question of, do I have to disclose this? What should I disclose? Because I don't have anything wrong with my property. Right. And the law doesn't require us to disclose something unless there's something wrong with the property. But it was it was just a touchy situation because it was the opposite of what you would normally expect. So foundation issues would be a big dollar item, and a big dollar item is going to land you in county court at law or district court, and you're going to have an attorney for that. So you want to be really careful on. I mean, we want to be careful on everything, but are you going to miss a broken window latch? Sure, possibly. But, big ticket items, you're not going to be able to defend yourself. You're going to have to hire a lawyer. It's going to be super expensive. And not to mention the damages are going to be pretty high. So
just because of the sheer fact that it's higher dollar amount for whatever repair it is. That's
right.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Small claims court, you can kind of represent yourself. And, if you're an individual, you can do that. And it's sort of user friendly. It's not as user friendly as Judge Judy, but it's similar. So you can navigate it without counsel, but you really can't do that. You have a right to in county court at law and district court, but you really wouldn't. It's just too difficult.
Have you heard any cases in regards to like asbestos or mold or anything in those? Because I would think that would be another. But I guess some of the mold stuff could be related to the water penetration.
I mean, that was a thing for a long time. I mean, that sort of died out. We haven't, I was actually joking about that the other day, that mold almost seemed to be a fad for a while because it was like everybody had mold and mold this and mold that. And you just don't hear it that much anymore. Very rarely does anyone call me with a mold question. Asbestos obviously would be in a house really, really old, really old. Yeah. I mean, definitely I've seen cases where a buyer discovers mold, or they got ill and thought there was mold, but that's been a few years now. I mean, it just seemed to be a fad almost. I'm not saying that it's not real, but you just don't hear it that often. Maybe in a home that's been abandoned. Now, certainly if you're buying a foreclosed home or a home otherwise that's been abandoned, you're going to see a lot of mold disclosures or a lot of mold notices saying we're not going to be responsible for the mold. So that's still an issue. It's still something to be aware of, but I think you're going to find it more in foreclosed homes or abandoned homes.
Okay. What about the What are some times where a seller is not going to need to provide a seller's disclosure? When would those times be?
Yeah, when the home is being sold pursuant to a court order, a foreclosed home, an estate, you're an executor for an estate, but typically that's going to be it. Or if there's a sale between divorced folks, you're not going to have to do that. But unless the home's being sold and pursuant to a court order, you're going to have to provide a seller's disclosure. It's just pretty much all the time. It's very, very rare that you're not going to provide one. It's usually someone acting in a capacity, such as a representative or an executor or administrator of an estate. It's not going to have to provide one.
Yeah.
But we do hear a lot of people who are investors who say, well, I've never lived in the property, but there's not an exception for that. So you still have to provide one.
That kind of leads into my next question. So what if you are an investor and you are selling your rental property? What advice would you give them? Because you haven't lived in the property, so you don't maybe necessarily know everything. What recommendation would you give that type of seller?
Well, first of all, if you're going to be an investor, you have to be serious about that business. And this is a lecture I give investors all the time, whether that's an LLC or your sub S corp or whatever sort of business entity you're going to have, your bank accounts, your minutes of your meetings. You have to go into this and be serious about it. You can't just be sort of a investor part-time and you're kind of halfway doing it and you're not really keeping up with your legal books, and you're going to get sued. I mean, you're going to get sued at some point, and you're going to lose because you didn't cross the T's and dot the I's. So, if you do enough investment properties or you have enough tenants, that come through your property, the chances are going up that you're going to find yourself on the other end of a lawsuit at some point. So I would say first and foremost, again, you have to read. You have to be serious about your business. You have to put together books of your property. If I go buy an investment property tomorrow, I have an appraisal, I have an inspection, I have paperwork from the previous seller. We need to keep that somewhere safe, that we have it, whether that's electronically or paper copies. We should know about our property. It really shouldn't matter that we don't live there. We should still know what kind of stove, what kind of heating. We should still know what kind of roof. We should still know all of that. As far as what's working today, then we can send an inspector through before we list the home and find out what's not working. And then we've got some reliance on a third party. That is a defense for us at the courthouse if we've relied on the expertise or professionalism of a third party. Probably not best to be our father-in-law or our friend down the street that's just kind of a part-time handy person.
Right.
But yeah, go contract with another company. Inspections are not expensive.
They're not,
certainly cheaper than being sued.
Yes.
And just have them go through, take a look at the property, fix whatever's broken, and then you can provide that to the other side. You're going to be hard pressed as a buyer to sue a seller who's done all of that. You're going to be hard pressed. That's not going to go very far. So,
and that also kind of, I know that agents in my office, we were talking a little bit about even recommending that sellers go ahead and get their own inspection. And then that way too, I feel like it makes the buyer feel more comfortable and confident about putting in an offer, because the seller has already, you have the seller's disclosure, you have the recent inspection that was done by the seller. You can look at all that. I would still advise getting your own inspection.
Yeah.
You don't want to rely on
that's right.
information. But at the same time, it gives you more confidence. It even gives you more confidence, I feel like, to even waive an inspection period if you wanted to, or have those days be super short, because you have more confidence in putting in that offer and knowing that nothing major, the chances of something major coming up when your inspector comes into play are going to be drastically reduced at that point. But that's great advice for those people that haven't lived in a property, or even, those that are not even necessarily required to have the seller's disclosure, like an estate situation to where it was their grandmother's house.
That's
and
right.
Sell it for the estate. Go ahead and get that inspection done. It'll make everyone feel more peaceful about the transaction at hand, I think. Absolutely.
And, appearance is 99% of it sometimes. If someone comes into my office to talk to me about a potential lawsuit or a grievance with the board, and they've got some sort of crazy notebook and sticky notes all over it and papers are all haphazard and they can't tell me when something happens, I don't have a lot of confidence that they did a good job in that transaction. Maybe they did a stellar job, but it doesn't look like that. And so when a seller comes to the table and they've got their documents together, they've got thoughtful answers to questions, and they've got information, they just appear to be people that have taken care of their property, and they probably are. And they probably are honest, but they appear more honest, and it feels like a more trustworthy situation than someone that says, oh, I don't know where my closing documents are from when I close, and I don't want to go look for them, which I've heard so many times, like, they're in the attic somewhere, but I don't want to go look for them. I mean, it's, you're talking about a big home. You're asking someone to pay a lot of money for a property that you've lived in. We need to go up in the attic and find our documents. Like, we need to approach this like a business deal, and we need to do our homework up front. And that solves a lot of problems, whether you're an investor or whether it's your homestead.
Yeah.
Other
question about, we'll go into the lease back here in just a minute.
Sure.
Because I know that we are going to start seeing a little bit more of that type of documentation going forward, tied to the contract. But what about with new construction? Are there any protections? I know that as a buyer, I always recommend the 3-point inspection, where you have your foundation inspected, you have the pre-drywall inspection, and then you have one right before you close. With a builder, there's no real true seller's disclosure. What are some common lawsuits that you've seen with builders? Because there are people looking at new construction, and
for sure,
want to see what you have to say about that too.
Yeah, okay, it's a great question. And new construction, with inventory so tight, new construction is a source of a lot of buyers' objects for purchase, because there's not a lot of inventory out there. And the thing about new construction that gets tough is that every builder is different. Every builder uses a different contract form. Your realtors are not as familiar with those forms. Now, if you sell with the same builder, you might be more familiar with the document, but we know that you can't really go over a document that's not TREC promulgated. TREC doesn't allow that. Texas Real Estate Commission doesn't allow that. And you wouldn't, because the documents are all so different. So one, I would definitely recommend that someone hire an attorney if they're going to buy a new construction, and have someone go over the documents for them. I think that's really important, because you want to make sure you understand the deadlines and your responsibilities under the contract with new construction. I've had several people in the last month say they got dropped from their contracts from builders because they missed a deadline, and their builder, quite frankly, could sell the home at a higher price today than they could 60 days ago when they contracted. So for a lot of reasons, you want to make sure you understand what you're supposed to do in the contract and what your obligations are, and that you take that seriously. I do find when I talk to buyers and buyers agents sometimes that they think that the due dates for their performance is fluid. Well, I'll get around to it today or tomorrow or the next day. It really doesn't matter. And those contract dates or those deadlines matter a lot. In a lot of cases, they're hard dates, and especially with builders, it's hard money. You're going to lose your earnest money or your deposit. You're going to lose your upgrade money, and that can be a lot of money if you've paid for some big upgrades. I mean, the builder has a right to keep that in most of those contracts. So I think that's really, really important, making sure the builder is staying on track with where they're supposed to be at in the building process, that you're watching all of the inspections, and that you're just looking at the documents. I remember a home that was being built for a customer, and it was a $750,000 big home, and she was standing out on the lot, and the sales guy, she pointed to something on the property, and the sales guy said, "Oh, that's I don't remember what he said it was, but it turned out it was a sewer pipe." But whatever he told her it was not a sewer pipe. And she tried to get out of it, that they didn't want to buy the property because there was a sewer pipe running through the backyard, and they wanted to put a pool there, and they couldn't. But the fact that there was a sewer pipe was all over their documents. So you also have to be careful about your sales guys or gals. I don't think for one second maybe that this guy intended to mislead them, but he did. And there is a merger clause in most contracts and most documents, and that's going to be whether you go and extend your cell phone service or lease an apartment or buy a home. And that paragraph reads something like, nothing anyone tells you verbally has any effect our entire agreement is contained in the document that you're signing today. That's a no oral modifications clause is what we call it. You're going to see those in your closing documents. You see them everywhere. And what it says is you have to read. We are expecting you to read the documents and understand what's in the documents. And if we tell you something wrong, that doesn't matter, because it's what the documents, how the documents read, that counts. And that's a hard lesson for folks to learn. And most people don't love reading real estate documents. They're not that exciting. They're pretty long. But yeah, no case, because I mean, it was disclosed everywhere that it was a sewer line. So she got stuck with the property. I think they bought it and then sold it because they didn't want it. But you know, that's a tough deal. She did. I mean, the salesperson did tell her that, but again, it was in all the documents. So again, my answer is real boring, which is just the answer's probably in the documents. You just got to read them and you just got to look at them. But I do recognize that builder contracts can be small type. They can be front and back and a lot of pages, which makes it hard to read. And so it's probably not a bad idea to hire somebody to actually just look at the document and go over it with the buyers so that they understand what their requirements are.
So how much does it cost to hire a real estate lawyer and get that? I know lawyers work by the hour.
They do.
And how many hours does it usually? It probably doesn't take a whole lot of time.
It doesn't take a whole lot. It's reasonable. I mean, it obviously depends on the attorney and depends on how fast you want it done. I mean, attorneys, we typically are pretty slow. But yeah, it depends on, you know, if you hand a lawyer a document on Friday and say, I've got to have an answer by Monday, probably going to be paying a premium for that service. But yeah, if you got some time and the lawyer has a little bit of time to look at it and they don't have to rush it through for you, then yeah, it's not going to be so burdensome that that someone buying, you know, a home that's being custom built couldn't afford it. Absolutely. And certainly cheaper than finding out you lost the home that you wanted because you missed a due date.
Yeah. Okay. So,
and in some cases, your title companies can prepare critical dates letters that show all the due dates. And if you've got a title company that works with that builder a lot, they're probably more familiar with the contract and how the builder works. You just want to be careful on relying on things like that. They're helpful tools, but they're not going to help you out if you miss a critical date. You don't get to say, oh, the title company told me the wrong date. I mean, it just, you know, you're supposed to follow the contract. So got to read them.
Would you recommend maybe going to the title company first, wherever the builder has you going, to ask about certain parts of the contract or those deadlines and stuff? And then, you know, just doing your research from there to find out if you need to branch out and find another real estate lawyer from that point?
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of cases, the title companies will close the same builder over and over again. And so your closers may be pretty aware. If you have a staff attorney at that title company, it's pretty aware of how that builder works and how those contracts read. That's not a bad place to start for an informal discussion. I'm sure most of us are going to be pretty willing to talk to you informally about what that builder requires or what those contracts look like. But again, probably not going to be. They're not going to represent you. They're not going to represent you as a buyer. If you want your own representation, you'll have to get it. Yeah.
Okay. Good. I know that Michelle says, great question. She's been looking at new construction. So. Oh,
good. I mean, while you're thinking about the leaseback question that you're going to ask me, I do want to just interject here because I would say the number one issue that we're having just as an industry as a whole is wire fraud. And so it's a good reminder for both sellers and buyers about wire fraud and being so super careful about the free emails. You know, most people don't understand how lucrative wire fraud is and what links the fraudsters go to get this money. And we will see attempts every day we have an incredible amount of security here at Fidelity, being a Fortune 300 company and publicly traded. We certainly have the financial backing to have the best firewall and best protections that are out there, but we still see the attempts come through. And what these guys do, gals, I mean, I don't know who they are, but they sit and they watch social media. And that's all they do. And they catalog information. And so if they're watching, you know, an agent interacting with John Smith on Facebook, and John Smith has a free email, and those hackers or those fraudsters will guess at passwords and use personal information to get into that to maybe that customer's email, and then they'll just sit and watch the transaction. And at the point that money is getting ready to move, they'll send an email that looks just like it came from the title company or title attorney or the lender, and they'll ask the seller, oh, hey, we're going to, or ask buyer, hey, send your money here instead. We've had a change of bank. Or they'll try to contact the title company and say, hey, I'm the seller. Here's my change of banking account information. We don't allow that. We are not going to allow, we don't want you to send it to our old account. We want you to send it to the new account. We don't allow that anymore. And it's so frustrating to say, to have to walk into a title company with wiring instructions. But the fraudsters are so sophisticated. They are so good and they are so diligent that we all just need to be super aware of how much we're at risk with wire fraud. And we don't want to go around the attempts by the title company to keep things encrypted. Yes, it's a pain. It's a pain in the neck when we have to have, two-factor authentication for every single thing. But if we can keep the transaction protected and encrypted, then we can keep those fraudsters from watching the email exchange, and then they won't get enough information about the transaction to fool the buyer and the seller, or both of them, into parting with their money. Because if you, as a buyer, if you are compromised and you send your money the wrong place, there's typically no recourse for that. There's no state account that's going to pay you back. There's not a cause of action against the title company or the lender. There just isn't. And you're going to be out. You're going to be out. And we've seen it. Life savings for buyers gone because of, we've had buyers where we've said, hey, Rebecca, we are going to send you your wiring instructions encrypted. You're going to have to put a code in to get them. You're going to have them in 5 minutes. Those would be the only wiring instructions you get. And the buyer's like, great. And then in those intervening 5 minutes, they get some random email. Oh, send them here. And they send them there instead of waiting for the encrypted email. So it's just, I can't say enough about being diligent about your money and what you do with the money and how you get it transferred. Always encrypted, always.
Yeah, and usually before they send the wire, I usually have them call the title company and say, what's the number again?
Yeah.
I mean, even if you feel like it is from the email that you received is from the title company, just do it. I mean,
just look them up online. Go to their website, call the number on the website. Don't call the number on the email address. That's right. And we've had instances where fraudsters have called our office pretending to be the seller. And so and we have to ask them specific information to figure out they're not actually the seller or they're not actually the buyer. So they're sophisticated. The fraudsters are good. They're really, really good.
Man.
Really good.
Yes. No, I haven't had anyone experience that, thankfully. And I've been,
it's sad.
So that's good.
It's really sad.
It's sad. It's a sad situation.
And as we were talking about the seller being prepared for closing or being prepared to sell their home, I would say another thing that I see happen that we don't see it as often. It's not an everyday thing, but when it happens, it's so detrimental to the transaction that's hard to recover from. And that's knowing who all the sellers are and are they available to sign. I had an instance with a file that the listing agent called me and said that Ms. Seller was ready to close, but the title company wouldn't. It wasn't us, but they wouldn't allow her to close. And I had to ask a bunch of questions. Well, it turns out that her boyfriend owned the property and he passed away. But she wasn't in title. She never owned the property. They weren't married, and he was married to someone else that he never divorced. So a lot of red flags here. I mean, you wonder why the listing agent wouldn't have caught that it didn't match up on the appraisal district website, that like someone totally different's in title. But in the idea that a girlfriend without a will was going to end up owning the property without any court intervention. So making sure we know who the sellers are and that they're all available for closing happens over and over again. If it's what we call a closely held corporation, meaning a corporation with a small amount of people running it, maybe a husband, wife, or maybe two people, we're probably going to want both of them to sign. We're not going to say, Rebecca can't tell us, oh, well, I'm the president, you don't need their signature, mine's good enough, when there's only one other person, because we're probably going to be like, oh, Rebecca, we think we'll take both signatures. That seems, there's only two people, we need them both to sign. So making sure you know who's entitled, especially if we're dealing with an estate or a trust, that we know who's ready to sign and going to be at the closing table. With a trust, we get a lot of, I did some estate planning, I put the property into a trust, but look, I never recorded the deed. Well, that's a problem. That's a problem, because the lender's not going to like seeing a deed recorded yesterday for a closing today. And you can't not record it, because recording is not required to pass title. So the second it was signed and delivered, title passed. So we have to record it now. Well, that's going to be a problem. So having those discussions up front, talking with your title company, having the customers come to us, and let's take a look at the vesting deed and see who we believe should be entitled, who we show's entitled, and making sure that kind of squares up with what the seller is expecting to come to closing with. Obviously, spouses are always an issue, and especially during a divorce. I mean, we could go on forever about who's at closing, but that comes up a lot. And so the easiest thing, hands down, is to have a conversation with the title company before we get that property listed and we get that first offer.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Anything that you can get before the property's on the market or right before to the title company to get things going and started early is.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely.
And I think a lot of sellers too, they more than likely, because I give my sellers a choice. I say, look, I had a good experience with this title company, and this one. You can choose to close at the last title company that you went with, but I do feel like there are agents out there that are not even really giving the seller the choice to tell them, where are we going to close, essentially. Because in most cases, I would say 70%, let's just say 70% of the cases, the seller is going to get to choose which title company they close at. And I think that's an important thing to look at as a seller, and to also investigate. I think a title company that does have a lot more security, like you were talking about with the wire fraud issues and stuff that are really at hand, that is something that I would really, truly, deeply inquire about. And then also, what types of experiences have other people had at that title company? I think that's also very, very important. And making sure that they understand your situation, I think, is another thing as well, because everyone's going to come to the table with a different situation when it comes to home. So
I think you definitely want a title company with staff attorneys, because it's too complicated typically of a transaction not to have a staff attorney. If you're talking about deaths or trusts or something like that, you want a staff attorney. You want a title company with staff attorneys. We have 4 just here in Dallas, but you want to be able to talk to one of those attorneys for something simple. I mean, and all of our attorneys here at Fidelity will give an answer. So one of the biggest criticisms I get is, well, they have an attorney, but they wouldn't answer me. We'll give you an answer. And, if we can't give you a strong answer, meaning we don't know what a judge would do, we'll tell you that, hey, this is what we think would happen, but we're not afraid to give an answer to someone that just needs a question. We're not going to represent anybody, but we can definitely answer some questions. I mean, after 23 years in the business, I've watched multiple title companies go down. I've watched them go bankrupt. I've watched people have money tied up in escrow and a title company shut its doors the next day. We've seen criminal activity with title companies where the money is just gone and the property's with it. And that's, you want to close with a title company that's got the money to back their policies, that's not going to close the doors, that's going to do everything they can to close in the face of an ice storm or a pandemic, and they have the ability to make that happen. Bigger companies just are more, they're more well situated for issues like that. But the other thing is, you want to close with when you want to use an agent like you, Rebecca, that is absolutely looking for a vendor that's in the best interest of their client, not that they're receiving some sort of kickback from the vendors, or they're receiving some sort of financial motivation to close with either a title company or a lender. It's important, and they trust you. You need to be able to trust your agent. And I just feel like it's really tough to trust an agent when they're making recommendations based on their pocketbook or their pocket or their wallet versus what's truly in the best interest of a client.
Mm-hmm.
If a client's closing in a small town and there's one title company in that town,
Yeah.
then it's probably in the client's best interest to close there. It probably doesn't make a lot of sense for, to close all the way over here in Dallas, Fort Worth, and
Right.
us to try to make it happen. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of factors that go into where to close, what lender to use, and those decisions should be made, or those recommendations should be made based on what's best for the client. And that's what you do, and that's what agents should do. And that's what sellers should trust in.
Yeah. So kind of going to the leaseback. So
Sure.
with new construction homes, I'm seeing more, like we need a lease back until July. We need a lease back until June.
Sure.
Because maybe they are building a property and they're trying to sell it now before it's too late, or they're trying to get the money out of the property so that way they can put into the next one. Or maybe they're just trying to have those couple of months to look for a home because they know it's going to take a little while to get an offer going and an offer accepted, because that's just kind of the reality of the market right now.
Right.
As far as a lease back is concerned, what is something that that can go wrong in that situation?
They don't move out. Number one, they don't move out. So
Okay.
if they're waiting on new construction and that home is not ready, they're not going to move. They're just not. They're going to sit there and they're going to say, sorry, we can't move out because our home's not ready. So how do you combat that? Well, you've got to put in a big holdover clause, a big holdover penalty. The penalty for holdover has to be pretty stiff, so that if they do hold over and you don't have the ability to get them out, to evict them, and if we have a moratorium on evictions, and that's going to be tough to do, you're not going to be able to get them out. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. Yeah. But if you can't, or even if it takes 30 days to get them evicted, that may have been all they needed was 30 more days. So you really haven't helped yourself. You can't throw someone out on the street, even if their lease is expired. You can't go in, grab their stuff, and just throw them out on the street. You have to go through the court system. So you want to make that holdover penalty stiff, so that you have some teeth when you go down to the courthouse to say, they held over, this is what they owe me. And it's got to be enough money to compensate you for whatever you're going to have to do. Are you going to have to hold over where you're at? Are you going to have to stay in a hotel? Are you going to have to pay for this moving truck with all your stuff in it? Or are you going to have to pay warehouse fees? So you just have to be really thoughtful about what is that amount of money that I need to put as this holdover penalty to make sure that I am truly compensated if I have to sue and get it. But I say the same thing about earnest money. When you're a seller and you're looking at offers, earnest money is one of the things that I think is super important, because the earnest money should be enough to compensate you as a seller in case of a buyer breach. And I always tell sellers, if they breach the day before closing, they breach the contract, they just don't show up to closing, and you're going to get the earnest money. Let's say you go to small claims court or the courthouse and you win that earnest money. Is it enough money to compensate you for what you've lost or what you've done? And it's never going to be $500. We see a lot of $500 earnest money. It's never going to be $500, never going to be enough money. And maybe we don't always get as much money as we want, but we want to at least be thoughtful about that. So same thing with holdover. Maybe we won't get enough money to truly compensate us, but have we been thoughtful about what that amount of money is? And are we aware of the possibility that they won't move out? Because it definitely happens. Obviously, damage, you've got a security deposit. So hopefully they don't damage it too much and you've got the security deposit. But just remembering that the real estate code does have some requirements for landlord tenant law. You've got to return an accounting, understanding of what those are about the security deposit and what your role is. You don't want to end up at the courthouse and lose money because you didn't follow all the steps of being a landlord. So it's tricky. Insurance is another issue. Making sure you have your policy in place and the tenant has a renter's policy. I would never let anybody be in without a renter's policy, because I would never want them to try to file a claim against my insurance if it burned down. So you just got to think it through. Again, same advice I gave from the very beginning. It's a business transaction. You need to pull back, think of the worst case scenario. And that's what we do. That's what lawyers do. You give me a situation and I immediately think of all the worst case scenarios. Salespeople, we think about all the best case scenarios, how great this is going to be for everybody. And we're Eeyores, we're gloom and doom, and we immediately go to what if they die, what if this happens, what if it burns down, and that's where our mind kind of goes. And so we just have to approach those types of transactions with the mindset of, okay, if this goes completely south, what do we have?
Yeah. Yeah. And Randy was asking, is $100 stiff enough a day for a holdover?
Yeah, I think it depends on the property. $100 a day is not a lot of money on $1 million property. So I think it just depends on what you're talking about. And, are you, what's it going to take for you as the landlord to take care of yourself? Is $100 a day nothing to the tenants? I mean, then that's not really maybe not be a whole lot of incentive to get out. But if it's an FHA range property, then maybe $100 is a good amount of money to keep them, from holding over. Yeah. It really just depends on the situation. Depends on the property you're talking about. Depends on, how much we think they might hold over, what our situation. And for me, a lot of it depends on what my situation is as the landlord. Mm-hmm. Because if it's going to cost me $200 a day to hold over where I'm at, then $100 may not work for me.
Right.
But again, Randy, you're going to do the best you can do. I mean, if it were up to me, we'd never write any contracts because I'd tear them all apart and we'd never agree to anything. So, you do have to have some compromise. I think the most important thing for me in coaching agents is just to have the conversation. Yeah, maybe you won't get everything I think you need to get or I think you should have, but at least you've had the conversation, you've thought it through, and you've kind of together decided, okay, this is what we're going to settle on. $100 a day is what we've settled on. And if our damages are more than $100, then we at least know we had the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I usually advise 300. I'm pretty, they're not going to squat there.
Yeah. Yeah. And having the conversation with the tenants about what are you going to do? What's the situation? Why are they renting back from us anyway? Is it new construction? Because that's kind of scary because that may very well not be done. Or is it something more definitive, a graduation, something we can clearly see is going to happen on a certain day and it's less likely to hold over.
Right. Or if it's a situation to where they're not sure where they're going to end up next.
Right.
Because that's even a scary situation to be in as well because they just don't know. And so how long is it going to take them to do X, Y, or Z? And there's no definite date. Whereas I think with a new construction, you have a approximate date, a little bit more than just like, we're going to look for another property.
That's right. And hopefully we find one and hopefully we move out. Yeah. And also the landlord who's moving in to the property, realizing that we probably don't need to be standing on the curb at 4:45 saying they're supposed to be out at 5. They're supposed to be out at 5. Yeah. And I get that sometimes. And I know they're anxious to move in and paint. It's their new home. They've been waiting a month for it or 2 weeks for it after closing. Right. But probably setting the expectation of, yes, they're supposed to be out at 5 o'clock on the 31st, but let's not plan to move in until Saturday because we probably don't want to be standing on the side of the street tapping our foot. And we've seen that get ugly. I mean, definitely seen that get a little bit ugly, and we don't ever want to see something escalate where police are called and it's a little bit nasty. So I think setting the expectation of, while they're supposed to be out at this time, let's just pretend they're not going to be out for another 48 hours after that. Right. And if they're out sooner, that's great.
Right. And I think too, just having that conversation, whenever there is a lease back and we are, either I have the buyer or I have the seller, either way, making sure that you're constantly communicating and giving updates. I think that helps alleviate a lot of, butting heads and bad situations.
Absolutely.
Communicating in those types of situations.
And I think too, anything that you can do to have more control of the situation. For example, cleaning is always a big issue. And when I was a closer and closed a lot, is one of the things I heard at the table the most often is it wasn't as clean as I thought it would be. Well, everyone's version of clean is different. I have 4 children. My version of clean is probably not what somebody else whose kids are gone is. If it sort of looks clean, then I'm pretty happy. But not everyone has that same view of clean. And so when you have a situation like that, hey, well, why don't we just have a cleaning fee and you be responsible for cleaning it? So in a leaseback situation, if you think that's going to be an issue, then say, hey, tenant, seller, we're going to charge you a cleaning fee, and when you move out, this service is going to come in and clean it, and that way we won't have the heartache of they didn't wipe out the drawers and all that
Right.
stuff. You can avoid that.
Will feel better too, because they're just like, I don't have to clean, because it's
Absolutely.
it takes a lot of energy to move everything out of the house.
It does. And then the tenant owner of or the landlord owner of the property, sometimes I've seen where we've got issues, or they're at the property every minute. Like they're right, I'm going to check on the pool today. Oh, I'm going to check on the tree today. Oh, I'm going to check on the lawn today. Well, we have to understand we can be at the property for reasonable appointments, but that is not every day. That's not reasonable.
No.
I know you're excited about your property, but now you're a landlord. You cannot go. You shouldn't go to the property unless it's absolutely necessary.
Right.
And you just need to let the sellers, finish out their lease back and start all your, landscaping and pruning and all that stuff when you actually get possession of the property.
Right. And I think too, what I usually advise my buyers to do, just kind of go in about once a week and get the mail, because there's going to be mail coming for you. Just that way there's still that level of excitement. You're excited to do that. And then just make that expectation with your new tenant. Say, look, I'm going to come by every Monday at this time, and I'm going to be ready with, for the mail. And that way they can even see, how, because the seller is going to start, packing things away, because they're not going to just wait till the last minute.
Sure.
Hopefully.
Hopefully that's the case. Yes, absolutely. Hopefully. Yeah. No, all great advice. For sure.
All right. Well, does anyone have any other questions that's still here with us today? I know Denise was, when you were talking about the snakes, I was kind of thinking the same thing.
Oh my goodness, in the crib. Oh no. Yes, Denise, it was in the crib. It really was. It was in the crib. It was gross. Yeah, it was really gross. And the whole idea that you had to burn the house down and then wait 10 years before you could build something else. No, we teach an MCE class that we do at Halloween called the Best Haunted Cases, and that's one of them. And we try to switch it up every year and give some great, scary, spooky cases from across the country that have to do with real estate. And unfortunately, there's just a bunch of them. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff like the snake case, but the snake one is really, really good. It's really interesting. And that one did actually go into litigation and settle. I don't think they went to trial. I think they settled. But
maybe we'll need to have you back again for
at Halloween.
Stories, at Halloween, or maybe just for some other cool stories.
Oh, great stories. Yeah. When you've supervised, 100 or 200,000 closings, you've got stories. We've got stories. We see a lot. What's the Allstate? Is it Allstate, the insurance commercial? We know a few things because we've seen a few things, or we know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two. That's kind of the title business too. We've seen a lot here.
For sure. Well, thank you so much for
having me. Absolutely.
And we will go ahead and end our live stream. And if anyone has any questions or needs to connect with Paula, if you have a question later on, or if you need her information, just let me know. I'll have my contact information below so that we can get you connected to her. So.
Yeah, and if you're looking to sell and you want to do a property profile for Rebecca's clients, we'll do property profile on your property, which will give you all of the current liens on your property as well as some comps in the neighborhood. It's just a nice color package that you can have for your property. So Rebecca, if you want to offer that to your customers, just let me know. I'll be happy to run a property profile for them, and they can have it for their property and make copies of it and leave it in the house for potential buyers, or just take a look at it and just see what's out there.
Yeah, no, that would be awesome.
Awesome.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.